Here's a challenge. Describe what a game is without using the words play or fun. The Oxford Dictionary defines games as a form of play or sport, especially a competitive one, played according to rules and decided by skill, strength, or luck. This is a fine definition, but I wouldn't say it really gets to the heart of what makes a game a game. It also includes the first of those two words I mentioned earlier, play. The reason I bring that and fun up is because those are likely the two words most people would associate with games, and yet they are also two words which are basically impossible to define. What is play? What is fun? Is play the same in terms of a game as it is to, per se, an instrument or even a toy? Is fun the same for everyone? Does a game need to be fun? In the end, these questions don't even matter. We can do better. My name is Devin, and this is Zogonomics. Rather than defining the term by what a game is, I would propose that games are defined by what they need to be considered a game. You could compile a long list of everything you think a game might need, but I would define a game as thus. For something to be a game, it must 1. Be interactive, 2. Have game-driven goals, and 3. Have a fail state. Without these three things, a game is not really a game, no matter how much else you shove into it. But what exactly are these three things? To start off, what makes something interactive? It's actually rather deceptive. You might say that it is anything that has some form of user input. And you'd be right to some extent. That is one form of interactivity. However, in this sense, interactivity is quite a bit more specific. Let's say that you're playing a board game that is a single path. You roll the die, move your piece, do whatever the space says, and repeat. Is this interactive? Though the player is doing something in this case, the game is actually playing itself. There is no way to skillfully roll a die. Now, let's take that original idea and have the board branch out, or even maybe be played on a checkerboard. In this instance, the player must make decisions on how their piece will move. We have now made the game interactive. Interactivity in the terms of a game is the ability for a situation's outcome to change through a player's decision or skill. A game needs to be interactive because otherwise there's no difference between it being played by people and it being played by chance or even just itself. A good example of a game that isn't interactive is Snakes and Ladders. In fact, it's a good exercise to try and figure out a variation on the game that adds interactivity into it. One possibility here would be to add a deck of cards instead of a die. Each player would get a hand of 7 cards. On a player's turn, they must play a card, that being the number of spaces they move. If they land on a ladder or a snake, rather than necessarily following it, they can play a face card. If they don't have one, they are forced to either bypass the ladder or fall down the snake. At the end of their turn, they draw enough cards to get themselves back to a hand of 7. It won't make the game spectacular, but it would add an element of strategy to it and turn it into an actual game. The next element is game-driven goals. This one is rather straightforward. A game-driven goal is a quantifiable way of measuring progress towards completion. For example, let's say you have a bin of Lego bricks. The building instructions would act as your goal. Sure, you could go off instructions, but it wouldn't get you any closer to the specific finished set. In that case, what you create would be considered a player-driven goal. These are fine, but they don't make something a game, at least not in a broad sense. A game needs to set goals because otherwise there is no progress. This rule is also incredibly and intentionally vague. What do I even mean by completion? Completion is merely just what the game is trying to get the player to do. In Tetris, Completion is get as many points as you can before you run out of space. In a team-based sport, completion is beat the other team. It can also be direct or indirect. The game could literally tell the player, go here and do this. Or, like in the case of Minecraft, it could be something that is never actually told to the player, but is left for their own discovery. In the case of Minecraft, it's beat the Ender Dragon. Basically, if you can defend your opinion on what is a goal, then it should count as one. Finally, we get to fail states. These are the hardest to really define simply because fail state is rather a misnomer. Again, this rule is incredibly and intentionally vague for those same reasons as before. But in general, what I actually mean by fail state is more of a breach of progress or a change in direction that goes against the player's control. If the goal is the checkered flag at the end of a race, then the fail states are any obstacles that you might face on the road, including the other racers. That's not to say that fail states are the same as obstacles, rather they are more the result of hitting one. This could be as simple as getting a game over, or it could be more obscure. Say the player needs to make a decision that locks them out of certain endings or options. A game needs these fail states because otherwise there is no challenge. Once more, if you can argue for it, then it should count. Arguably, this third rule is the most important, keeping in mind that you still need the first two. A story without conflict isn't interesting. While it is not necessarily true that you learn more from failure than success, it is more tied to your mindset than your results. See Mark Rober's TedX talk about the Super Mario effect linked in the video description. It is nonetheless impossible to improve if you don't face any obstacles at all. If there is a possibility of improving your skill or score in a concrete way, e.g. a high score list or just being able to beat a hard level that you couldn't before, then there is a fail state somewhere, regardless of how abstract it might be. Before finalizing the script on this episode, I asked a friend to look it over and tell me what he thought. He replied that he found the idea very interesting, and then asked whether I thought of Cookie Clicker as a game. At the time, I didn't think it was. I thought it was clearly interactive and had game-driven goals with a clear progression curve of how to improve your rate of acquiring cookies, but I didn't consider it to have any fail states. He then pointed out that while there is no real way to lose progress, you can learn to optimize your strategy, which in essence means that the point of the third rule is still met, a point that I absolutely agree with. This is why I say that if you can argue for it with a good enough reason, it should count. Now, after all of this, you might be thinking, why the heck does this matter? It's probably just me, but I feel like there's a sort of stigma that if some piece of interactive entertainment is not a game, then it is actually bad, or at least worse off. Perhaps less edifying would be a better term to use. Far more likely is that we just lack the vocabulary to describe the other situations that lack one or more of these things. Heck, if you've noticed, I've even been using game in almost every instance of this video, regardless of whether or not something is actually a game, for lack of a better term, and to get the point across. In all honesty, saying this video is about defining the term game is really a bit of a fib. But that wasn't actually the point. The point was to get you to think more critically about what makes something a game, and that is the first step towards game design. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider liking and subscribing. Also, if you would like to keep up to date with everything Zogonomics, please go to zogonomics.com. Huge thanks to my friends Adam, Greg, Anna, and Austin for all their help in getting this episode ready. See you next time.